All right. My name is Clayton Sinyal, Executive Director of the Catholic Labor Network. Thank you all for coming and joining us here today. We're here for a webinar about the Catholic Campaign for Human Development and worker justice, and what the CCHD does to support workers who are fighting for justice in the workplace and on the job. My organization, the Catholic Labor Network, has been around for about 25 years. We bring together Catholic union activists with Catholic clergy, religious, and lay social justice advocates who share a passion for worker justice and for Catholic social teaching on labor and work. We are pleased to have the support of Catholic Campaign for Human Development through a national strategic grant for our Church Labor Partnership Project. The Church Labor Partnership Project tries to bring together church organizations and labor organizations, both labor unions and workers' centers, to promote justice for low-income workers and for immigrants. We have been able to do this in large part because of the support we get from the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. I realize a lot of you may not be familiar with CCHD, and that's why we've held this and what it does to promote worker organizing. That's why we've organized this program today. We're going to start by hearing from the director of CCHD, Ralph McCloud, here in Washington. And then we're going to hear from an organization, a worker center supported by Catholic Campaign for Human Development. Tim Bell and Barry Rose are here who are going to talk about their work organizing among temp workers in Chicago to improve conditions on the job. So let me begin by handing the baton to the director of CCHD, Ralph McCloud, to talk about what CCHD is, for those of you who are unfamiliar, and what kinds of activities it supports. Ralph?
Thank you very much, Clayton. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. It's also a pleasure to share a little bit about the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. I'll talk a little bit about the history of CCHD, as well as a connection, I think, a very strong connection, I think, between the values of the Catholic Campaign for Human Development and the values that we uplift as it relates to labor and organizing in unions. The church has long supported the values of workers, and CCHD has a time-honored role in doing that. We've been around a little bit longer, twice as long, I guess, as the Catholic Labor Network, a little over 50 years. And the bishops founded the Catholic Campaign for Human Development as a result of looking at the signs of the times, of seeing what was happening back in 1968. As you might imagine, or as you might remember, some of us might remember the assassinations of Martin Luther King and the assassinations of Robert Kennedy, the unrest, the racial unrest that was happening all over the country, the reality of violence and unrest in 110 major cities around the country where buildings were burning and lives were being lost, and the whole nature of polarization that existed. And as I think about that, I can't help but think of and make comparisons of what was happening then and what's happening now in our country. But they founded it to respond to the reality of poverty and the abject poverty that existed. And they felt, as in their wisdom, they felt that they did a good job in their schools, the homeless shelters, the soup kitchens, and hospitals. They did a tremendous job in some of the direct service efforts, but there was still something that was missing. The missing element that they felt was that people were still being pushed to the margins of the society and not having a role or being able to participate in the future of themselves, the future of their children, to live in the kind of dignity that God wants all of us to live up to. So 50 some years ago, that's when they came together and said that we need to do something to complement some of the other efforts, that people were still being left out, people were still being pushed to the margins. And how do we respond to that as church in a faith-based way of doing it, in a way that we would actually touch people of different denominations and ethnicities, and especially a focus on people of color, because the population seemed to be marginalized then as now the most. So CCHD came together for that reason. So $400 million of support and over 12,000 CCHD supported funded groups. We find ourselves where we are today. But the purpose of CCHD had two legs, if you will. One was transformational education to remind people of poverty that might not be exposed to or might be insulated from poverty, to remind folks the pervasive nature of poverty and how it affects people and families and communities for those who might not be able to be aware of it, as well as the big chunk, what I'm going to talk the most about this afternoon, is the grant making arm of it, of how CCHD works to kind of support people to, for lack of a better phrase, learn how, not just learn how to fish, but learn how to fish as a community. So we have and even in the grant making arm, we have two arms, if you will. That being the economic development initiatives, where we fund things like community land trusts, helping to find to get folks sustainable housing by purchasing the land, so folks can put the land in a trust, and the cost of the land won't go towards the purchase of the house, and families can have housing at a much reduced rate. So we support those. We support things like worker-owned co-ops, where workers become self-determinant in their futures when they own the organization or the institution or that they're working on, and can chart their own futures. Community development, financial institutions like small credit unions, and job creation initiatives. So those are the economic development initiatives associated with the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. By far, the biggest thing that we support is that of community organizing, that people come together to identify what their needs are and what are the things that are keeping them in poverty. The bishops in their wisdom 50 years ago, and it was a non-negotiable component of CCHD, that the persons who find themselves in poverty, they have to be the ones to be the voice of telling us what they need to pull themselves up out of poverty. So something that we insist on to this day is that the boards of directors of these community self-help organizations of low-income people, the boards of directors, the voice, the people who make the driving decisions of the organization, those are the ones, they have to be over 50% of those persons on the board. The voice must be that of the people themselves, as opposed to some sort of patriarchal organization coming in and saying, this is what you need, this is what you have to do. CCHD in its wisdom and in its core says, low-income people make the kinds of decisions of the organizations, and they're the voice of telling organizations what it is that they need the most. Community organizing and depending on who you listen to, a basic definition is that it's a way of people and groups coming together to organize and take measures to influence policies and cultures surrounding them. They identify what the self-interest is of the organization, of the community, and those are the things that they promote to help pull not just themselves up out of poverty, but to pull larger populations up out of poverty. Some examples of community organizers might include things like public school parents who organize to demand a high quality education for their children. CCHD works and supports some of those. Or neighbors who come together to organize to address public safety or potholes, for example, in their communities, that if asked for individually, they would not be successful. When they can come together as a community and ask for some of the things that they need in a community in an organized way, they're able to be successful. Things like, laid out factory workers who organize to protest organizations and industries being shipped away and taken away. And organizing oftentimes, and even CCHD to a degree oftentimes will get a bad rap as being limited or left leaning. But I like to say that CCHD, Catholic Campaign for Human Development, has the best of the left and the right. Has the best of progressive and the best of conservative. For persons who might want to argue that people need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, this is exactly what CCHD is. CCHD helps people to have boots and to realize the power that they have in themselves for no other reason than because they're made in the image and likeness of God. Because of that, there's a great power that's naturally theirs. So things like, for example, the Boston Tea Party, the 1963 March on Washington, for jobs. They were for without immigrants rallies that happened back in 2006. The Poor People's Campaign, the Tea Party, movements, all kinds of movements, Black Lives Matter movements, the March for Our Lives, some of the things where folks come together under a common heading for a significant reason and cause to help themselves is what community organizing can be all about. It has a nature of interdependence, the individuals that belong to some of the community organizing. And I say interdependence is because if we're nothing else, CCHD holds itself out as being relational. And in those relationships, there are bonds that are formed that oftentimes will extend beyond the community organizing relationship. I mean, relationships that'll be formed, that'll be lifelong relationships. And they can work on issues together, but they also become friends and realize that there's a core dependence on one another. That's something that's big and broad and very, very, very beautiful. So for example, so when the issue was affordable housing, a group in San Juan, it's off the coast of Washington, D.C., didn't have the kind of affordable housing that they had, but they came together. They got a grant from CCHD and formed the Community Land Trust, and they explored ways of being able to come together and create housing in a very creative way. And they even like moved homes and houses from another portion of actually it was Canada, I believe, that they moved them from, and created a tremendous housing community. They even developed 29 homes in 2 different neighborhoods, and they're slowly building and charting a 15-acre parcel, which was previously zoned for multifamily housing. When the issue was children in Louisiana being imprisoned for mostly nonviolent offenses, things that we would be taken to the office for back in our days, these young people were actually taken down to jail cells and placed in jails. An organization that was funded by the Catholic Campaign for Human Development called Families and Friends of Louisiana Incarcerated Children came together and thought of ways that they might be able to help assist people who found themselves in this particular situation. Again, individually, one parent couldn't have done it, but when groups of parents come together and say, we want to help craft a solution by meeting with the law enforcement, by meeting with persons who are policymakers, by meeting with folks who might be able to attack this in a way. So they did things like create development classes and things like create behavioral support, promoting teacher training and conflict resolution. When the issue was violence and poor community police relations in the city of Baltimore, residents came together in the Sandtown neighborhood to work with law enforcement to bring together people together. And because the organization had been formed, this community organization, No Boundaries Coalition, had been formed, they were able to have a relationship with other organizations around the city. And they came together to do things like cleaning up the neighborhood after violence, to create community police relationship meetings by coming together. They were able to deal with a way that was able to minimize violence, minimize harm, and all at the same time promoting what the needs of that community was in a way that was bold, in a way that was productive and very effective. When the issue was people with irregular immigration status were being denied medical supplies, the CCHD supported group called Living Hope Wheelchair Association came together and fought in a way to let people know that just because the folks who who found themselves in who were disabled because of spinal injuries were able to confront the things, and just because they had irregular immigration status, they weren't being allowed to access some of the benefits in this particular county. But they came together and they were able to research and organize, and they were able to get, and they're continuing to get tremendous benefits because of it. So those are just a handful of the many, many, many ways that the Catholic Campaign for Human Development is participating right now. Again, we've been doing it over 50 years. We are continuing to look at ways we might be able to address poverty in a way that's whole, that's complete, and that's effective. You know, I'm a bit selfish. I mean, I shudder to think of what would the country look like. I mean, there's certainly tons of problems that we have as a country and as a community, that if it wasn't for the investment of almost a little over $400 million and 12,000 community supported organizations, had it not been for that, you know, what the shape of the condition would be in. But beyond that, I think that tremendous relationships have been formed. The church in this area, in this particular area, has been seen in a very, very positive light as being able to enhance the lives of low-income people that would not have been done without the efforts of the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. The relationship between the values of the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, the relationship towards labor, I think are very, very similar. The whole idea of a preferential option for the poor, giving persons who find themselves without effective, efficient employment or benefits or wages. Those are things that keep you from living up to the dignity God wants us all to live up to. So given that preferential option to find themselves who find themselves not being able to avail themselves of that is something that's very important. The whole nature and notion of subsidiarity, of persons who are closer to the decision, making the decision themselves, having the power of making the decision themselves, having the freedom to make the decision themselves is something that both labor and certainly CCHD firmly believes in. Finally, I would just say too, and I certainly want to listen to our friends here who have gathered, is the whole leadership development that CCHD insists and encourages for folks to be able to develop leadership skills that enhance their ability to confront public officials, to confront systems, to confront organizations that are suppressing them or keeping them from being able to have the kind of benefits that are rightfully theirs. I think that CCHD holds that very high, and I think organizations like labor unions and organized labor do as well. CCHD supports an increasing number of worker centers around the country where they're not necessarily organized as unions. There's certainly very, very powerful organizations that insist on persons being able to get the kind of rights that they need as workers. And they insist on things like preventing wage theft. They insist on things like being paid overtime hours. They insist on things like making sure that workers are working in the conditions that aren't dangerous to them. So I think there's a tremendous and natural kind of connection between CCHD and it's been a pleasure to work with the Catholic Labor Network. And the whole idea and notion that we're not doing this because of a feel good or because it's something that's trendy. We're doing this because this is what we believe. This is what we believe in as part of our faith, consistent with who we are as Christians, consistent with who we are as Catholics, that understands the nature of the nature of being able to have the kind of employment that will allow you to contribute to the local community where you live, that will allow you to contribute to families, to allow you to be able to live up to that dignity that, again, that God wants us all to live up to. With that, I'll hush. I look forward to listening to our folks from the Chicago Collaborative, and really grateful to have an opportunity to be with you this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Ralph. That was a great presentation. I should mention at this point, I am a member of the Construction Laborers Union. That's where I come out of and my background. And I have long appreciated the close relationship in values between CCHD and the labor movement. My union was built by immigrants, low-wage immigrants from mostly from Italy, more than 100 years ago, who came together on construction sites and formed a union and fought their way out of poverty by organizing amongst themselves and developing their own leaders. And it's exciting to know that my church in 1968 came together with the same inspiration and established this special collection for the Catholic Campaign for Human Development in order to support low-income workers and the poor who are organizing to better their condition. Right now, I'd like to hand off the baton to our guests from the Chicago Workers Collaborative. They've done some very impressive work among temp workers in Chicago, and even with the support from CCHD, and even managed to not only organize to improve the conditions of work, but actually got the protection of a union contract in the process. So let me introduce to you Mr. Tim Bell and Mr. Barry Rose of the Chicago Workers Collaborative.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tim Bell, and I'm here with Barry Rose. The Chicago Workers Collaborative has partnered with CCHD for about 17 years. The Catholic Campaign was our first grant when we began as a grassroots group of immigrant workers and has supported us throughout our journey. The collaborative is focused on building the leadership and advocacy of the growing workforce of precarious workers who labor outside of the union context. While we remain a Latinx-based organization working to raise and enforce labor standards with undocumented workers and their children, we believe racial unity is a key to building power both in the workplace and in policy circles. In a moment, you'll hear from Barry Rose. Barry is a board member of the Chicago Workers Collaborative, a former union shop steward for Workers United Union Local 76A, and a pan racker and sanitation worker at Gold Standard Baking, which is an industrial bakery which makes products for name brands like Burger King and Starbucks in Chicago. Barry has been a leader of CWC for 7 years, during which time he has ascended from the most vulnerable positions in our society as a temp worker and a returning citizen into a leadership role. Barry's work organizing inside and outside the industrial bakery has forged a new path for temp workers, we believe. Barry helped to lead an effort also to build Illinois' legal protections for temp workers through the passage of the Responsible Jobs Creation Act in our state, which are now the strongest protections for temps in the country. And he's also paved the way for one of the labor movement's most critical and innovative initiatives, I believe, and that's bringing temp workers into the union. To understand Barry's achievement, just a little background is needed on the temp world. So throughout the industrial sector in this country, it has become normal for employers to hire a whole layer of permanent temp workers. This splits the workforce between the core workers and the contingent segments of the company. The latter consisting of permanent temps and other contract workers. And this is done to repress the wages, undermine unions, and divide the workforce. And it's essentially the divide and conquer strategy of the 24th century to drive standards down for workers. The presence of permatemps in thousands of workplaces has hurt all workers, not just the temps. Union shops are not exceptions. We estimate that there are about 80,000 temp workers in our state who are in closed union shops. And these temps are moving in and out of the workplaces, replacing the union jobs that were once the solid core of building the middle class in this country. And then the threat that's produced by importing the temp workers serves effectively to discourage and often defeat union efforts, and it paralyzes the organizing of unions and the movement. In addition, the temps on average make about half of what the direct hire workers make. And this number gives some indication of the outrageous rate of exploitation being suffered by the 800,000 blue-collar temp agency workers in our state. A tremendous loss in wages that would have made a difference between poverty and a living wage. And so temp workers being effectively stripped of union rights in the United States, a temp turned organizer is a very rare thing. When workers don't know whether they'll be back on the job tomorrow, it doesn't often make sense for them to take up organizing. It is therefore a special achievement to overcome this near impossible contradiction to become a leader of your temp agency co-workers. In this situation, the organizer's job is to reverse the trend and join together the temp and the union workers in the plant. Barry has been a worker organizer at the leading edge of this struggle. And for this reason, it is really an honor for me to introduce Barry to you all today to share his story and his journey. Thank you. Barry?
Hello, my name is Barry Rose, and I am a returned citizen for incarceration. And when I got out of jail, they was always talking about how you gonna come back and all this stuff. The first thing that was on my mind was to look for a job. And where do I look? And how do I look for a job? So that's when I learned about Elite Staffing, a staffing agency that hired incarcerated people. So I got a job at Elite, and Elite sent me out on to a factory called Pactive. Once I went to Pactive, it was okay, but it was like the conditions at Pactive was really too hot, and they didn't have fans for us, and we was sweating up a storm. So I did like 8 months out there, and then they turned around, they was trying to hire me, but the lady, the liaison at the factory, she was making like, I'll make sure you don't get hired. So she made my job there a living hell. So she finally got her wishes and DNR me. So
and DNR means do not return.
Do not return, right? And when she DNR me, we had a meeting with the company with Elite, and I wouldn't file for my unemployment and everything, and he was saying that people like me that been in incarceration, all we want is a job for a day. And I had to prove that was wrong. I wanted a job so I could take care of my family and my kids, because I got 2 girls, you know, take care of them and put a roof over their head better than what they had at first. So he gave me the job back working at another factory at Bedford Park. In Bedford Park, they had us doing the work as the mechanics and our regular work. So we had to do 2 jobs. I work and keep the machines running. So, but the condition at Pactive, all the machines was dangerous. They wasn't using lockout, tag out. They wasn't. So we did an OSHA thing out there for the Bedford Park. And they got rid of all the temps because they figured somebody had ratted them out. And then they finally got me. So then they go, instead of DNR me and without giving me another job, they sent me to Gold Standard Baking. So when I go to Gold Standard Baking, they had us working in the oven, which was, the heat was unridiculous. People couldn't breathe. They was falling out, passing out. So we did an action out there for better treatment in the bakery. So after they seen that I did the action, they called me upstairs to the living room saying, how can we make all this go away? So I told them, all I want is a job. So they gave me a job at the bakery. And
you're no longer working for Elite Staffing.
I was no longer working at Elite Staffing. And when I was working at Elite Staffing, there was no benefits, no insurance, no nothing. But then when I came to the bakery and working as a bakery worker, we got all kind of insurance benefits and stuff. So the people elected me to be on the bargaining committee, which fight for people raises. So when I was fighting for their raises, after we got some good raises, we got $1 for 3 years. $1.10 for a year, something like that. After that happened, they elected me to be the union steward. So when I became the union steward, we was fighting for, instead of working 90 days at the bakery and then turn around and not get the job, we made sure that if you work 30 days at the bakery, they should be able to make up their mind whether they want to hire you or not. So we changed all that so that the temp workers wouldn't have to work and then return. Because I had met people that had been turned around like 3 times. I was like, y'all never got a job out of 3 times? So we did the action. I got hired. They didn't turn me around. They didn't fire me. So I became the union steward. Then I saw that's the connection between the Chicago Workers Collaborative and the union steward. We fought. And now people getting into the factory faster. Because now they don't wait 90 days and it get turned around. But they had to have a good reason to turn it around. Now the union knew about all these people because when I first started working there, it was like 60% temp workers, 40% regular workers. Then it went from 80-20. And then all the temp workers just started getting hired regularly. They weren't playing that game no more with us. So we fought. So that's the part where the union and the collaborative, we can work together. Because like, say for instance, the union was saying they didn't know nothing about all this. And Chicago workers was doing surveys at the end of the day. They out there doing surveys, asking the people how they feel about the bakery and how they feel about being a temp worker versus a union worker or a permanent temp. So everybody wanted a job. So we got them hired in.
So now, Barry, in that factory, there are about 20% temps, and when you started there in that factory, there were about 60%.
Right.
So about how many new union members have come in because of the organizing at Gold Standard Baking?
We like at 80% now. Everybody getting into the union.
Yeah, and what I understand was about 200 new members for Workers United out of this campaign. So thank you, Barry, for the presentation. I don't know if you all have any questions or anything, but it's a long story told in a short period of time. There are many details involved in building up the campaign, but it's not very often that you see this sort of thing happen in this country anymore. The temp workers and the direct hires are usually fighting against each other, and in this case, they were able to come together to improve the conditions.
That was a fantastic story and fantastic achievement. As you mentioned, in this country, we see a growing number of companies that are trying to shed their responsibility for employees by shifting more and more work to temps. And you all, by organizing, managed to turn that around and compel the company to hire on the temps as regular employees and give them the rights and the benefits of regular employees. At this point, we have time for folks to offer any questions they have for any of our panelists, whether it's Ralph McCloud, Tim Bell, or Barry Rose. Feel free to drop questions in the chat or go ahead and raise your hand and maybe I'll see you. Ralph has something to add.
A question, actually, a question. Thank you, Tim and Barry. The question I have is for Barry. Before we went on today, you spoke about some of the conditions that caused you to have actions against the employer. Some of the situations that were dangerous. Could you talk a little bit about those?
Well, people was coming to me and they was like, we need to do something about all this, but nobody didn't really, like, say for instance, I had 10 names to do the action. Everybody wanted to do the action. I had 10 names. But in actuality, when I did the action, everybody got scared that put their name on the list to do the action for fair treatment in the bakery. They bailed out on me. So I was already set to do it. So I just went on ahead and did it.
What are some of the conditions like inside the factory, like the heat you were mentioning?
The heat, we had business with the gloves they wanted us to wear had holes in it. And when you pick up a hot pan, it would burn you. We was working between two ovens. We didn't have no fan. And in the back where we was, they didn't have no communication to us being back there. So if something happened or somebody passed out, somebody had to look up and walk back there and find us.
Remember Anthony Bates? What happened to Anthony Bates?
Anthony Bates fell out and they said he had a heat stroke. And then they turned around, took him to the hospital and brought him back and put him back to work. And we thought that was crazy too.
Okay, we have a question from Rob in Milwaukee, who asks how Mr. Rose found out about and connected with the Chicago Workers Collaborative.
Well, the way I found out about Chicago Workers Collaborative, it was a guy named Richard. I was doing some more collaborative work with another organization, and they hooked me up to Richard, which was the Chicago Workers Collaborative, and he came out to my house and wanted to hear my story.
Okay, and another question coming from Lori in New York. What was the salary difference between the temp workers and the union workers, and how long did the organizing campaign take?
Well, the salary for temp workers and organized workers, the way the bakery worked is that all the workers make a certain amount, and the temp worker was making like 10 or 11. They was making like $13. And now we almost like $1. We almost up there together as of today. Because the going rate is $15 in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody at $15 almost.
It was a bump about $2, right? But what about the benefits?
Benefits, health insurance, life insurance, and dental, all kinds of stuff we get that we didn't get as a temp. So it was better to be a GSB employee instead of a temp. Then you get vacations, you get sick pay, personal days. As a temp, you don't get no sick day, no personal day, no nothing.
And how long did this campaign take?
For I think
A few years.
2 or 3 years. I've been negotiating for 3 years for the bakery. That's a union store. About 3 or 4 years.
And what did CCHD do for the collaborative to help make this happen?
Well, CCHD helped us to pay for our organizing staff to be able to do the work.
Another thing, when they had COVID out here, they gave us masks. I passed out about 1,000 masks at the at where I work at. It goes down to bacon, and they was like, "Where did the masks come from? All these good masks?" And they came from Chicago Workers Collaborative. I told Father Chuck gave it to me. He cared about us, not the company. The company was going out buying dollar masks, and we was going out fast.
Okay. Have a hand raised from George Donahue. George, if you have something to say, you'll have to unmute yourself. All right, Linda, you've got your hand up. You can unmute yourself.
I wanted to know, excuse me, did the temp workers, as you organized, did you form your own union? Or did you become part of the original union? Or were y'all still fighting? I mean, I realize union workers in general didn't want you coming in and taking their jobs. So I just wondered how all that got resolved between the two groups.
Well, the way I became a union member was they elected me to be the union steward. They elected me for the bargaining committee. So at first I was just Chicago Workers Collaborative, and then we combined all that together. And that's how
So
I got
you became union.
right.
So the union in the shop is Workers United, and it's, you know, temporary workers could form their own union in theory, but it made a lot more sense to try to get the temp workers moved into the union that was in the shop.
Right, of course.
And then we figured out a way to do that because of the clause in the contract that said that after 90 days, a temp worker had to become a union member. And the company would basically take someone out of being a temp worker on day 89 and then bring them back a month later or put them on a different schedule. And so you ended up with the people coming in, staying here for 2 years, 3 years, right? But
So
they
the
didn't-
company didn't allow them to stay the 90 days to fulfill the contract regulation. That's what I was wondering, how the contract was set up to keep temp in or make temp incorporated. That answers both of the questions I had up. Thank you.
They let the temps be re-rotate, but they never had a job to get the benefits. But as long as you come back, you was good enough to come back, they'll let you work.
Right.
So we had to find a way to get them as employees and be in the union so they could stop that re-rolling temps around.
Right. Because it had to be a 90 consecutive day period, not 2 months here and 2 months there, whatever.
So we stopped all that and made it 30 days. We gave them 30 days to hire a temp worker instead of 90 days. So the process could go faster.
That was under the new contract that they negotiated when Barry was on the bargaining committee. They reduced the time limit from 90 days to 30 days.
Oh, wow.
Which is a huge victory for the temp workers and for the union.
It's a huge achievement. Yeah.
Yeah.
Congratulations. You did well.
Now we have a question from Father Ike out in Los Angeles, who says, Mr. Rose mentioned his 2 girls. How does he believe they see him now, and how is the home now? What inspires him today to keep going forward?
Well, my 2 girls, they think I'm a role model when I tell them about the achievement that I have and some of the fights that I had. Because we CWC went to Springfield fighting for our rights as returning citizens, that we can get jobs. So my daughters, they see me as a role model that they can do better and push on their jobs instead of just letting things happen. If they don't know something, they'll call me to learn their rights as a worker.
That's excellent. How does Sean asks, how does the Workers Collaborative determine the campaigns that they're going to undertake?
That's driven by the workers who are in the organization and what their needs are. We have a General Assembly of Workers that meet monthly, and campaigns are brought forward to the Assembly, and then Mr. Rose is on the board of directors, and so the workers' voices are in the decision-making positions of the organization as far as the types of campaigns that we choose.
Great. Mr. George, it looks like you've been able to unmute. You have a question? I see your hands up.
Yeah, yes. My apologies. I'm used to everyone being muted by the host and they unmute. I had a struggle, and I'm using my phone, which is I'm not used to. First of all, I was going to ask everybody to just introduce themselves because I'm new to this. I've been on your mailing list for a while, but I'd be interested in knowing where everybody's from. As you can tell from my accent, I'm from let's see, Texas. I'm from Texas. Yes, that's where I'm from. Or some people might say Brooklyn. I'm 78 years old. I'm retired. I spent the bulk of my career as an attorney in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. Prior to that, aside from other places, I worked at the Association of Catholic Trade Unions, ACT2, and it was formed in the 30s by my father and mother and other people. And I love this, we were running a leadership training program that was funded by a Catholic businessman in the New York Archdiocese, getting community leaders to become the leaders of their community, which is very fascinating. I spent most of my time referring everybody to lawyers provided to us by the federal government. So I decided to become a lawyer. Don't ask me, I ended up with the district attorney's office, where it's actually a very positive role.
Mm.
And I'll be interested in following the association after this. That's my.
Thank you.
That's
Sure. In the interest of time, since there are some more questions, I would invite all of you to drop your name and organization in the chat, since that's how we do this, share information with each other at these large meetings with lots of people here. I do want to get to some of the other questions. There was a question, a person asking, how does CCHD connect to initiatives on the ground? Or how can folks doing creative things in organizing and labor access CCHD grants? Ralph, you want to start that one?
Sure, I'll be glad to. The a two-part question. One is that we have kind of divided the country into 5 regions, and there are 5 different people who are responsible for each region, and those persons are there. They're on the ground and pre-COVID, and hopefully, God willing, pretty soon back in those communities and neighborhoods, know the regions very, very well. That being said, we're always hearing about new and creative initiatives that are out there as it relates to organizing and economic development. We want to hear about those. I always tell people, let us be the ones to say that we can't fund it or we can't support it. Don't assume that we can. The other way is going to our website and seeing what the requirements are, what the qualifications are for organizing and funding groups. There's a great deal of flexibility and latitude in the things that we're able to support. Again, but it has to be community led. The people who find themselves struggling with poverty have to tell us what it is as opposed to someone else. So, and we encourage that activity to happen.
All right, that's great. I'm going to put Jean on the spot. Jean Giannotta, if you're with us, I believe you're the grant specialist for the Midwest. You want to talk a little bit about how you identify projects or how projects identify you?
Yes, sorry, Clayton, I'm here. Yeah, I think Ralph summed it up pretty well. We usually work very closely with our diocesan directors. Each diocese has a CCHD contact person who helps us identify and works with community organizations like the Chicago Workers Collaborative. And usually through local grants, they develop those organizations and they become eligible. If they're not already, if there are any weaknesses in terms of our requirements, they become more eligible for CCHD funding, meeting some of those requirements that Ralph has already talked about. And that's a good way to develop relationships between the organizations and the dioceses, parishes in the dioceses, and really build that partnership in an authentic way. And then when they come to us right now, we are in our pre-application phase. And so we review those applications to see whether groups are eligible. But often during this period, we're referred organizations by diocesan directors. We have conversations with folks determining whether or not they might meet our national criteria, or maybe they'd be a better fit for local funding in this cycle and wait until they're stronger fit. Maybe there's some weaknesses in some of those requirements, because as Ralph said, it's really important that the organizations that come to us are community-led and really are empowering low-income people. And it's not just charity. CCHD's mission is very much about justice, and that begins within the governance of the organization itself. But yeah, that's it can be a challenge sometimes, but it's important to have those relationships at the diocesan level. And as Ralph said, for us in the national office, also to talk with groups that may be interested in being funded by CCHD, to get to know them better and understand if they are a good fit for us. As Ralph mentioned, they shouldn't assume that they don't qualify. It's important to kind of build those relationships both locally at the diocesan level and with us, so we can work with them and understand how we might be able to partner, even if it isn't a direct funding relationship.
Can I ask you to tell us about a few other organizations or campaigns that CCHD has supported in the Midwest?
Oh gosh, quite a few.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot
No.
without notes, but
Yeah, wow, there are a lot. I mean, Chicago is a real hotspot for organizing activity. A lot of organizations in Chicago, like CWC, are doing really good and important work. I saw Rob from Milwaukee is here, and Milwaukee has many really worthwhile organizations that are doing important work on criminal justice reform and economic development as well. We have a new organization we're funding there that is working to employ women who are survivors of sexual abuse, and that gives them real ownership into their work, and gives them training opportunities as well. We have other organizations like that all around the Midwest. We have organizations there's an organization we fund in Missouri for alternatives to the death penalty, that is working to end the use of capital punishment in Missouri. We have, which is not specifically about workers' rights, and my mind is going all over the place right now. But in Cincinnati, we have the Cincinnati Interfaith Workers Center, which has been doing a lot of work similar to what CWC is doing, particularly in terms of the rights of workers during the pandemic, which has been a huge issue. In Missouri, to go back to Missouri, an organization that we support, the Rural Community Workers Alliance, they have organized workers at food processing plants, which you may remember, it got a lot of attention early on in the pandemic, and has still been an issue throughout the pandemic. Workers at poultry processing plants, most of us get our chicken and pork and all the other kind of meats that we enjoy. Workers at those plants that make that possible have really been both on the front lines of making that possible, but also really kind of, disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And RCWA did a lot of really important work, and has continued to do a lot of important work. And I know there are many other organizations that are doing similar things in other parts of the country as well.
that's great. Thank you. Sorry to put you on the spot like that, but you've mentioned to me some of the great work that some organizations are doing with the CCHD's support in that area. And we're just about out of time. I have one more question that's been tossed out. And that is, someone is asking about regional impact grants. I don't know about that. Do you, Ralph, could you explain that, or is that, or is someone thinking of something else?
No, they're probably making a reference to strategic national grants. It's a program we started a few years ago, and when the bishops thought that it'd be a good idea to try to look at addressing poverty on a larger and a strategic way that was beyond dioceses, even sometimes beyond states, but in a region. And we've done several of those over the years that deal with things like assisting persons who are returning citizens, things like working on the environment, things like working with low-income new mothers. And it's been wildly successful, almost too wildly successful. But we're at a point now where we're kind of at a pause where we're evaluating some of them that are out there. It's done extremely well, and we're hope to tweak it and look at ways we might be able to do it in another way.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Our hour is up, but I really appreciate Ralph McCloud, Tim Bell, and Barry Rose for joining us today to talk about CCHD and worker justice, and to share this great work that the church and workers are doing together. Everybody, I hope you have a good afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. Have a good day.
God bless.
Take care.
Thank you.